Hello, I'm Evan with New Life for Old Bikes. In today's episode, we're going to take a late 80s or 90s mountain bike, fully rigid, and we're going to convert it into a daily cruiser for Hilary. What we were looking for was a fully rigid frame. We wanted caliper brakes for that vintage look. We wanted a single piece crank, but we wanted some modern conveniences. It has the lugs built in to route the cables. It also has a water bottle mount. There are two things you want to make sure you get correct when choosing a frame. The first is your reach. The reach is the distance between the seat post and the handlebars. We want to make sure that is the same as the distance from your armpit to the palm of your hand. The second thing you want to be careful to make sure you get right is the standover height. The standover height is the distance from the top of the seat post to the ground with the wheels and tires on it. The standover height is especially important on a man's bike. When you come to a stop, you don't want to hit yourself on the way down. The last owner of this bike didn't leave me a whole lot to remove, but one thing I do need to remove are the handlebars. We're going to go with a swept-back style, which will be more like a cruiser bike. The next cruiser signature style item will be a spring style seat. Any vintage cruiser style bike worth its salt is going to have a set of full fenders. These are actually vintage fenders off of an old Schwinn. First thing we're going to do is remove the nut off of the brakes so that we can fit the fender on it. This back fender was originally mounted here. I removed the mount and I straightened out the crease put in the fender so it would fit in between the frame, and I've actually moved it up here. When I remove the fender from the bike to repaint, I'll go ahead and fill in this hole right here. For my wheels, I chose a set of chrome steel wheels to give it that vintage look. I also chose a set of wide white walls. Since this bicycle will probably be ridden on some trails and some hard packed sand, I chose a knobby pattern. The drivetrain on this bike is going to consist of a Shimano SIS index shifting system. We're going to install the derailleur next so that I'll be able to put the wheel on it. When adjusting the front derailleur, make sure it clears the top chain ring by 1 to 2 millimeters, i.e. about 1/8 of an inch. Also look down on it and make sure it's parallel to your chain rings. In an ideal world, I'd have the original chain from this bike to compare my new chain to. Unfortunately, I don't, so we're going to test fit this. I'm going over the smallest gear in the back, and I'm going over the smallest chain ring in the front. On the derailleur, I'm going to go over the top cog and in front of it. Then I'm going to go behind and underneath the bottom cog. When the two pieces meet, I should have tension on the derailleur. That looks like that should be good, so I'm going to go ahead and connect the master link. As you can see, this is a little bit too loose, so we're going to remove a couple of links from this chain. I've removed 2 links from this chain and installed my master link. I do have a video on replacing a chain if you need to see this in more detail. The next part of this puzzle is the cockpit. We're going to put the 6-speed shifter on the drive side of the bike. That's the right side of the bike. The 3-speed front shifter is going to go on the non-drive side or left side of the bike. When putting the handles on, make sure that the tightening screws are on the back. So this one right here is for the non-drive side of the bike. At this point, I'm not going to install the grips on the bike since we'll be removing all this to paint, but I do want to check for length. When tightening the brake handles, Make sure that they're facing down at about a 45-degree angle. On this particular build, I'm using thumb shifters to make this as true to the era as possible. There we go. Next, I'm going to install the drive side shifter cable. The first thing I'm going to do is cut off the end that we don't need. I want you to notice there's two different ends on this particular cable. I'm going to measure the shifter cable to make sure that it fits properly. And what I'm doing is I want to make sure there's enough length so that the cable doesn't bind, but there's not so much that it gets hung up on stuff. So I'm going to cut it right here. Once I've cut the cable to length, I'm going to run an awl through it to open it up. The next thing I'm going to do is run the new cable through the hole in the thumb shifter. I'm lining it up through the hole. Pull it all the way through. There we go. The next thing I'm going to do is measure the cable length and make sure that I wipe grease where the cable housing is going to be. The reason I'm doing this is to make sure that moisture doesn't get into my cable and rust it. Once I've greased the cable, slide the housing in place and slide the cable in place. This particular bike has a cable guide on the bottom bracket. All I have to do is slide it through that cable guide. I'm measuring the back section of cable and wiping a little grease on it. Again, this is just to prevent any kind of rust. Sliding the cable through the cable housing. Next, I'm going to put a ferrule on the end to protect this end of the cable housing. Slide the cable through the barrel adjuster. Then slide the cable through the cable clamp. Make sure the cable is nice and snug and tighten it up. I'm leaving these relatively long because I will be disassembling the bike to paint it, and I want to make sure there's plenty of extra there just in case I need it. Just like with the shifter, The brake cable has two different options. I'm going to cut off the one that I don't need. Just like with the shifter cable, I'm going to run the cable and check the fit. On the front, I need to make sure that there's plenty of cable so that it doesn't bind, but I need to make sure that it's short enough so it doesn't get caught on anything. That looks about right. That should be good right there. And make sure to put a cable ferrule on the end of this one as well to protect it. Once I have the cable pulled through the cable housing, I slide the cable through the barrel adjuster and through the cable clamp. When adjusting the back brake, make sure that you leave just a little slack. Don't pull it completely. If it's a little too loose, you can always adjust the barrel adjuster out. That's what this is for. One thing I neglected to point out on the back, and I wanted to make sure everybody knew, while you have the brakes open like this is the easiest time to change the pads. The pads on this bike are mismatched and they're rather worn, so it's getting a new set. Squeeze the brake together and you'll be able to tighten these up in the right spot. Good. Just like the back cable, the front cable has two different ends. I'm cutting off the unnecessary one. Next, I'm going to measure the housing for length. That looks good right about there. Matches the other one. Next, we put a ferrule on the end of the cable to protect it. Once we've greased the cable, simply slide the cable through the housing. Slide the cable through the barrel adjuster, and then through the cable clamp on the brakes. With your brakes tight, it would be a little bit too tight, so we're going to back off on them just a little bit and then tighten the cable up. Just like with the rear shifter cable, the front has two different ends. I'm removing the one that we don't need and pulling the cable out. Okay. Next, we're going to cut the shifter cable for length. And I'm trying to make it the same length as the other one. That fits nicely. Just like with the rear shifter, there's a hole the cable needs to go through. Pull the cable all the way through. Just like the others, I'm measuring the cable length and putting a bit of grease on the cable. Just like the rear cable, the front cable goes through a cable guide underneath the frame of the bike. Once you've pulled the cable through the cable guide, there's another guide right here that we're going to slide the cable through. Then we're going to slide it around the cable clamp. Make sure the cable is snug. And tighten it up. Okay, we're working. Make sure you pull the cable out of the way so it doesn't hit you while you're riding. Tomorrow, I'll be taking this bike out for a test ride. Once I have all the bugs worked out of it, I'll be taking this apart and repainting it, and I plan to take you along for the ride. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and don't forget, like and subscribe.